This is the entrance to the government headquarters in Bastia, St. Kitts Nevis. It was on these steps, on the evening of 18th June 1981, that the representatives of 7 Eastern Caribbean governments signed a treaty that established the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS. The Treaty of Bastia created an organization whose supreme policy-making institution was the Council of Heads of Government of the member states called the Authority, and a secretariat with a Director General and 2 directors. These officials, together with the 7 signatories to the Treaty of Bastia and the first Prime Ministers of the Authority, were the founders of the OECS, those who laid the foundation for an organization which 35 years later has become an essential part of governance in the Eastern Caribbean. In observance of the 35th anniversary of the OECS on 18th June 2016, the OECS Commission presents the series, The OECS, The Founders, which tells the story of the first 5 years of the organization through the memories of 5 of the founding leaders still with us. This program is about a man who was neither a signatory to the Treaty of Bastia nor one of the first Directors General of the OECS. It is about a man who became head of an OECS institution 7 years after the establishment of the organization, but whose transformative work for the cause of regional integration has placed him among the founders of the OECS. He is the late Sir K. Dwight Venner, former governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. Like the other 5 founders featured in this series, whose record of service to the OECS was to be preserved through their own words, Sir Dwight was to have been interviewed for this program. But before the arrangements could be confirmed, he unfortunately passed away on December 22, 2016. Sir Dwight Venner became governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank in December 1989 and served there until November 2015. Born in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on 21st January 1946, he was a child of the Windward Islands, completing his early education in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, and St. Lucia. His university education was at the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies, UWI, where he graduated with BSc and MSc degrees in economics. From 1974 to 1981, he worked at UWI first as a junior research fellow at the Institute of Social and Economic Research and then a lecturer in economics. In November 1981, he took up the position of Director of Finance and Planning with the St. Lucia government, from where he transited to the ECCB. In June 2001, he received a knighthood from the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for services in the financial sector. And in December 2011, the St. Lucia Cross for distinguished and outstanding national service to St. Lucia. In this program, we review his contribution to the OECS through the memories of some of those who worked with him. At the second meeting of the authority of the OECS in November 1981, the heads of government adopted what has become one of the most important decisions in the history of the OECS, when they agreed to upgrade and transform the East Caribbean Currency Authority, ECCA, which was managing their common currency, into a central bank.
Could you imagine if we didn't have that now? Yes, we all got together and we agreed that we would have a central bank, which was a wise decision of the heads. They always criticized us for not doing anything, but that was an excellent decision. And then again, we chose the right person. You had Jacobs, who was an authority, who was a solid person, and then later on we had Dwight Venner. And so, again, you had to get the right people in the right hole to suit it, and it was an excellent decision for us to do that.
I agree. Sir Dwight succeeded Sir Cecil Jacobs. Sir Cecil was a very cautious and deliberate, solid person. And at the time when the central bank was established, he was the right person, because you're entering into the unknown and you needed somebody with that caution. And then, after having laid a good foundation, I think Sir Dwight came at a time when you can move to another level. And that is what happened. Sir Dwight had vision, and he was willing to move sometimes into the unknown.
One will have to remember that prior to the establishment of the bank and Sir Dwight becoming governor in 1989, for a while Sir Dwight represented St. Lucia on the board. And so one can say that he was integral in the formation of the central bank. The ECCB Agreement Act, which is the governing act for the central bank, would have been discussed years before the establishment in 1983. And so Dwight would have participated in those discussions and then became governor in 1989, December 1989. So he would have had a thorough understanding of the central bank, its beginnings, its foundations, having participated in discussions with then I think there was a consultant from the IMF who had been brought in to design the agreement. And so Dwight was very, very familiar with all provisions of the agreement. I mean, there were instances where he would just quote things from the agreement, and then you will have to scamper and go and check for yourself. And so it embodied the way that he managed this institution.
First of all, he had technical competence. He had been familiar with research work, being a lecturer at the university and having time to do research work. And then he was employed by Sir John Compton in the UWP government in St. Lucia as the financial secretary. So he had hands-on experience in running a ministry of finance. And of course, that's the heartbeat of the government. So that when he went to the central bank, he went there as a young man, really. And so that he had a long run as governor in which he could work with political leaders from different generations, because of he worked with the generation before me, and then I came along, and others who are similar age like Dwight.
So Dwight, he was a diplomat. So I would say he knew how to navigate that political arena, yeah? Being at the helm of the ECCB and being a eighth member, yeah? You have different personalities. You have different political views, different persons of, different persuasions. So he had to be able to navigate and chat, I would say, those political waters. And he was a diplomat. So he could handle and knew how to handle. But he was humble enough to know when to step back and, okay, they're the political masters, let them. And he was a strategic thinker and he could see the bigger picture. So as I said, he was the right person for the job at that time. And it was a time, I think, when we needed to build up the region, build up the institution. So and he was able to do that over that 26 years. So I agree, right person, the right time.
Sir Dwight's diplomatic and technical skills were also vital in establishing the bank's reputation in the international community.
Well, the central bank, as a multi-territorial central bank, is one of 4 in the world. So we are unique. So you have 2 multi-territory central banks in Central and West Africa, and of course the European Central Bank, which came after us. So it uniquely placed this bank in a situation where it had to struggle through in the international community to be recognized as a multi-territorial bank, central bank, more so because this central bank really serves a very small population size. The reckoning right now is about 630,000 citizens that are in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. So it's not a big bank per se. And I have had the opportunity to have been with Sir Dwight in numerous discussions with international financial institutions who took us for granted. And the power of persuasion of Sir Dwight, because he knew what he was about. He knew where we wanted to go. Changed around the perceptions that a lot of individuals came with these preconceived notions that this is just a small, if I use a local term, 2x4, institution, a tea boutique, as we say in St. Lucia, and therefore, we could walk over. But that was not the stance of Sir Dwight. He had to pull all his stops to make sure that the institution became recognized. And more so in my association with him in the 2009 financial crisis. This is where I saw definitely the power of the gentleman, because we were faced with unprecedented financial crisis. We have never had it of that magnitude before, and therefore we needed help to get over the situation. And he, said, we are not going to lie down and let people walk over us. And so when the persons from the international financial institutions came and offered technical assistance, it was, we had battles in the boardroom, battles, ideas contending in terms of trying to get our position across the discussion. And we won eventually, right? And I think that itself, in recent memory, placed us in a category that we are well respected in the international community. To such extent that now, when we have discussions at that level, persons turn to us first for advice. And we of course, if people turn to us for advice, it means that the advice that we can give them is worthwhile. And I think that has to do a lot with the way that Sir Dwight approached his mission as being governor of this bank.
When Sir Dwight came on stream, I would say he moved cautiously at first, and having established himself, I think he commanded a great deal of respect among peer institutions, that is, within the CARICOM central banking, because CARICOM central banks meet at least twice a year. And over time, he really got the confidence in them. And also internationally, it's amazing, because the Bank of England hosts every year the central bank governors from across the Commonwealth, okay, those who are in Commonwealth, every year. And feedback, what we get, I've never been to any of those, but you do get feedback, is that he gained a great deal of respect. And of course, over the years, he was the longest serving.
How much did that contribute?
Tremendous, because many of the African governors respected him a lot and found that he was more outspoken than they dared to be themselves and wondered, what manner of man is this?
At home in the region, his achievements can be found in the 5 priority areas of his vision for the bank.
From the time I joined the Monetary Council in 2001, there are certain things Dwight was very focused about. He was focused about maintaining a strong currency so that the real effective exchange rate would be stable and the currency strong. For small countries, small islands, small territories, he thought that that was very important, even though by fixing it to the US dollar and maintaining the peg, 90% back in. Sometimes it went over 100%. At the end of 2017, the back in with hard currency of our EC dollar was 97.1%. So he bequeathed it in a strong condition, and it has continued under the his successor in that way. So that's first thing, strong currency. Second, financial sector stability. And that became more and more important as problems arose with banks and insurance companies in the region. Very important. Third, growth and competitiveness, because that's the real economy. And he always reminded everyone of the critical pillar. Growth and competitiveness really is jobs and wealth creation. Reminded everyone about equity. Always to make sure that we had the fruits of the labor should be spread as equitably as all the circumstances admit. And so he had a strong moral. And of course, it's a practical thing too, and he saw it as vital for the economy.
The dollar has been in place since 1976 at the fixed exchange rate of 2.7 to $1. That has been maintained, and that is one of the signaling effects, I think, of Sir Dwight's tenure as governor of this bank. Right? What backs our currency is our foreign reserves. The concept of pooling of our foreign reserves, meaning that all 8 member states, the foreign currency that they earn, whether it is US dollars, and it's principally US dollars, or euros, that is put into a pool and invested overseas. If we had to do it individually, then we would not have been able to achieve the parity and the parity maintained at the level that it has been for that period of time. So the pooling concept, which was a construct from the ECCB Agreement Act, and as I mentioned earlier, so Dwight was involved in the drafting of that act, has done us well. In the legislation, the legal limit for the backing of the currency is 60%. So that means we must have 60% of foreign reserves to back it at the parity of 2.7 to $1. Last week, it was in the region of 97%. And we have maintained in the 90s since I came here. In fact, when I came here in 2006 and 2005, we were at 100. Before the crisis, we were at 100. So it meant effectively that the EC dollar was a US dollar, 1 for 1.
Well, that has been our policy for a very long time, to have a strong dollar policy. And that's very important in this part of the world, because when you're going to change the parity or the value of a currency, it is either unintentional or deliberate. Okay? So the question would be, what are the circumstances now, okay, which would lead us to do that in an unintentional way? And we don't see them because, number one, first of all, the currency is very highly backed. Yesterday it was 96% backed by foreign exchange reserves, okay? And that is not a condition for devaluing the currency. Secondly, what the IMF does, it looks at these things in terms of the number of months of imports that you have, because you have to buy imports with foreign exchange. We have 5 months supply of currency to buy foreign exchange. That's all the imports, right, in the OECS. Then we do tests and analysis, as Mrs. Nero would have told you, very regularly, looking at the real effective exchange rate to see whether it's competitive or not. They don't indicate that it's uncompetitive. There's no economic crisis in sight right now. And remember, we've gone through 4 years of recession, okay? There is no flight of the currency, not that we or anyone has noticed, okay? There is no run on commercial banks, okay? There's no hyperinflation. Inflation has been contained to 2 or 3%, okay? I mean, these are the objective conditions, right, which call for a change in the value of the currency. They don't exist at this particular point in time. And if you look at the backing of the currency, the legal backing is 60%, right? We have an operational backing of 80%, and we are usually at 95 or 96%. Okay? Right now, even though we are linked to it, we have a fixed link of 2.7. And I will want to tell you that in July, it'll be 37 years since it's been at 2.7. So it does have a lot of historical credibility, because I'm sure you're not 37 years old, or even if you innate with that, it means as long as you've been around, that's what it's been. And that is what investors and domestic people, right, acknowledge. That's why it's an anchor, okay? So that people say, we are certain of the value of this currency vis-a-vis United States dollar. Therefore, if I'm a foreign investor, okay, and I invest in the OECS or syndicates, it means that I know the rate that I'm getting for the dollar, okay? If I'm an importer, okay, and that's the value, I know the value of what I'm paying for imports. It's the certainty, okay? You see, in economic life, right, there are not many certainties, so to speak, okay? So that what policymakers have to do is to say, here is an anchor that people are sure of, and then that's a decision that's taken off the books, you see? And so then you can make other decisions knowing that that is something that holds, you see? And that's why we say it's an anchor. It brings certainty. So for the people of the OECS, very small economies, very vulnerable, okay? If there wasn't one certainty, okay, then the level of economic uncertainty that exists, you see, would be too much for the system. So you have to hang, that's why it's called an anchor.
Well, let me give you an example of how important it is that the banking system is sound and it is run effectively. One Sunday morning, a friend of mine from United States rang to say, you know, there's an institution in London which is under trouble, is in trouble. And that institution, we at the central bank had most of our external reserves. They were managing reserves for us. And so I called Sir Dwight, and this is another part of his character. A very hard worker. He would work for 24 hours if necessary. So he called a meeting of the critical persons for 2 a.m. at the central bank. No, you know, because so that we can have a confab ahead of the market opening in London. Because we had then, you know, to inform the board of directors of the possibility that we could lose reserves, and and also, more importantly, inform the council ministers of the potential threat. And you had to do that within the same day. After having spoken to the authorities in London, I mean, he was able to speak to the governor of the Bank of England. And by Wednesday, we were able to reassure all parties that everything was okay. Everything would be okay. You couldn't sleep during that period. Impossible, you know. Even after then, you know, you still had to wait for things to settle down. So one of the things we learned from that, we had started earlier in that year to train our staff, our investment staff, to be able to manage more of our reserves. It's amazing.
And vision.
Precisely. And so that process continued in that we took more of our reserves for management.
The bank under Sir Dwight undertook a major capital market development program. It realized the establishment of institutions such as the Eastern Caribbean Home Mortgage Bank, firstly, and then the Eastern Caribbean Securities Exchange, which I now have the pleasure to head and which I was instrumental in bringing into being, is prime among them. The Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission to regulate the markets and all of the other market institutions that exist came out of that program. Of course, the program had other elements of it that sought to look at the investing. So there was a unit trust, the Eastern Caribbean unit trust component to it. There was an enterprise fund component to it. So it was a broad program to develop the financial infrastructure within the Eastern Caribbean. I should also mention here that one of the successes of the program as well is the regional government securities market, which enables governments to raise financing at much cheaper rates than they have had in the past. And it has done quite well. Governments have raised over $11 billion since it was established in 2002 to now. So I think the Money and Capital Market Development Program is one of his major achievements.
There was also, within the banking system, what was introduced was Eastern Caribbean Home Mortgage Bank. What did that bank do? Now, from time to time, banks need greater liquidity to be able to lend. And what the Home Mortgage Bank did was to be in a position to give liquidity to banks based on collateral, so that a bank which needed liquidity, cash, because it is fully lent up and has got some clients who are coming for further lending opportunities. So such an institution would provide the Home Mortgage Bank with a collateral, and the Home Mortgage Bank will give it liquidity, right? And so it can then lend to persons coming in. And at a later stage, the reverse can take place when liquidity changes. In the early, let's say the mid-1990s, he tried to encourage the indigenous banks to consolidate because he saw the threats on the horizon. And so that it wasn't the case that he was against the international banks, but stronger indigenous banks could compete much more effectively with the international banks.
And stronger if they were united rather
Precisely.
than 6 or 7 separate
Right.
indigenous banks.
Exactly.
Central banks have traditionally been focused on money, on the money supply, inflation, the currency, keeping the currency strong. And he did all that, but he did more. One of the biggest things Sir Dwight did was went on a program of engaging all partners, all development partners, bringing people to the table, whether they be development banks, social securities. Well, of course, it's the natural constituent were the commercial banks, but bringing everybody to the table, the chambers of commerce, the business sectors in the region.
He had no difficulty with persons coming in to the bank and spending just a few years. You did not have to spend, like me, 21 years, yeah? You could come in, do 5 years, and you went back. It could be to the Ministry of Finance, to the private sector in one of the islands, and you then passed on that training and that discipline that you gained from being here at the ECCB. Because as I said, I think it's finishing school. It really molds you in terms of your discipline, your thinking, the training. So he had no difficulty in persons coming in and then returning after a few years to the country, or private sector, public sector, and then imparting what they knew. But we also started this program where persons would come for attachments from the ministries of finance, come for 1 year attachment and then go back. He engaged in lots of regional workshops and training for the staff from ministries of finances across the OECS and ECCU so that they could then go back and have that knowledge and impart it.
During his tenure at the central bank, there were 3 major challenges and crises which Sir Dwight had to face. The first was the 2008 worldwide financial crisis, with its deleterious impact on the fragile Eastern Caribbean economies. Then a run on banks in Antigua and Anguilla, and the collapse of two major insurance companies.
He helped us to stabilize the economic situation in the region, particularly in the difficult years immediately after the global economic meltdown in 2009. September 2008, and continuing and up to the time when he left.
The beginning of 2009 was marked by the intensification of what has been called the most significant disruption of the financial and economic systems in the advanced communities since the Great Depression. The impact on our economies has been significant. We are estimating a contraction in growth in the currency union of approximately 7.4% in 2009, primarily due to the declines in the tourism and construction sectors. The situation in the currency union was compounded by the collapse of the British American and Clico insurance companies and a major run on the Bank of Antigua. These events in both the rail and financial sectors severely tested our technical capacity and administrative arrangements. The currency union consists of very small states with limited fiscal space and regulatory resources and highly stretched policy capabilities. The current lesson learned in 2009 was the power of collective action. At the highest political level, the prime ministers and ministers of finance came together in a joint meeting of the OECS Authority and the ECCB Monetary Council on 15 and 16 January 2009 to review the situation and craft a response to the crisis. This joint meeting was subsequently institutionalized. The ECCB intervened on directives from the Monetary Council to address the Bank of Antigua situation, with the Monetary Council being involved in an extraordinary series of meetings by video conference and face-to-face to effect a successful rescue of the bank. With respect to developments in the insurance sector, a subcommittee of the Monetary Council was established to deal specifically with this issue and has crafted a possible resolution to the matter, which is being vigorously pursued. During the course of 2009, a tremendous amount of work has gone into two specific initiatives. The first was the creation of an OECS economic union to formalize the obvious success of the collective action which characterized the response to the crisis. And the second was the specific elaboration of an 8-point stabilization and growth program to address the current and future issues needed for our economic and social advancement.
Our view was that we needed to contain the situation in Antigua so as to prevent any spill-off effects that can occur in banks in Antigua and by extension in other banks in the region. So we had a battle. We had a real tough battle, okay? And once we started putting in the measures that we could put in, because our legislation did not contemplate that we would be facing such a crisis. And so we had to use our intuition, and so Dwight made sure that we got top-notch individuals, experts in bank resolution.
With regard to the failures of the insurance companies Clico and Bico, there is a view that the central bank was in a position to have been aware of the impending situation.
We must remember this, that the regulatory regime for insurance companies, that regulatory regime was always, and it still is, in national hands. And Dwight has been pushing. He pushed before his death, and his successor is still pushing. And I have presented to Parliament here in St. Vincent some of the same ideas about to have a regional regulatory regime for insurance companies. What is important in, say, Clico Bico? There were elements of their portfolio which appeared as though they were banking products. And they gave undertakings, financial institutions gave undertakings that there were enough assets to cover the writing of those policies, assets to be in the statutory fund. Because, you know, in each of these countries, you have to have the statutory funds under the control of the regulator. It turned out, certainly in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and it happened in other places too, that the assets, the undertaking which was given by reputable institutions, let me use that general formulation, financial institutions, that it wasn't, the undertaking wasn't as clear as they made it out to be between themselves and the owners of the insurance company. And in some cases, the assets were doubly or triply pledged hitherto, making those assets insufficient to meet the needs, the requisites of the statutory fund. So the question of the movement of the currency. Remember this, we had taken a decision to, and all the countries, we had removed exchange controls. So you will check the money moving and you'll see what's happening. It doesn't mean that if an insurance company moves a certain amount of money out of your jurisdiction, that the insurance itself, company by that fact, is weak. It is the business of the regulator to say what is sufficient for their statutory fund and to give the permission for them to write particular kinds of policies.
The 2008 international financial crisis and the crises in the banking and insurance sectors in the ECCU reinforced Sir Dwight's fundamental belief in regional political integration, that the creation of a single economy out of these mini-states was essential to their economic development. For him, the crises were an opportunity for deeper integration of the Eastern Caribbean states.
The OECS and the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union will emerge from this crisis more integrated and coordinated than ever before. We could not have done this acting as single countries, which underscores the urgent need for unity among our countries. This has been the case not only in governmental circles, but also in the banking sector, where 5 indigenous banks stepped forward to assist in the rescue of the Bank of Antigua Limited. They are the St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla National Bank Limited, the Bank of St. Lucia Limited, the Antigua Commercial Bank Limited, the National Bank of Dominica Limited, and the National Commercial Bank of St. Vincent Limited. The OECS countries are now moving into an era where creativity in establishing a supranational arrangement of shared sovereignty regionally and domestic responsibility at the national level is virtually within our grasp. In creating this new arrangement, we will have to be mindful of what we are moving from and where we are moving to. We have to give up the narrow nationalism and insularity, which we are sometimes guilty of, and move to more open and outward-looking arrangements consistent with the concept of an economic union. We must not fit the humorous description of a nation described by the political scientist Curtis K. Deutsch as, quote, a group of people united by a common error about their ancestry and a common dislike of their neighbors, unquote. If we can successfully overcome these misconceptions, we can emerge as a model of multi-state development and leaders in regional affairs. In short, an example to the international community.
He was a regional integrationist to the core, and that guided his vision, that the central bank as a creature of the integration movement should further this cause.
The integration of the monetary, of the currency union, He wanted to see that integration to be paralleled in other areas. That is why he pushed very much for the OECS, in addition to it being a kind of confederal institutional apparatus, for it to be deepened. Thus, the revised Treaty of Bastille, establishing the OECS Economic Union, which came into being in 2010. He's the one who fashioned the idea, which was set up, and it has gone a little into disuse, to have joint central bank OECS meetings, of which I was the chair, whether or not I was chair of the OECS or of the Monetary Council, because he wanted someone to always be holding the things together and to have them moving and moving in tandem, because clearly, and for your viewers and listeners to appreciate, the central bank addressed monetary issues, though increasingly he added the issue of fiscal stability to his number of issues because of its connection with monetary stability, the debt question and so on, and that was connected to financial sector stability, because the governments borrow too much from the banks. They put a problem, they have a problem put on the banks, particularly the indigenous banks. So he wanted to make sure that the other dimensions, the growth and competitiveness dimensions, would be fueled by work in the OECS and the OECS Economic Union as it came into being, trade questions and the like.
I'd like to say that we were lucky to have someone like Dwight Venner there for as long
As he was.
as he was, because Dwight was an integrationist, as I told you, from way back. And especially from where I sat at the OECS, then the Economic Affairs Office, later on the OECS Secretariat in St. Lucia. There are things that we wanted to do, which we could not because we were limited by our resource constraint, financial resources, staff resources, which we were able to persuade the central bank to take on first. Okay? Mm-hmm. And, we were well received most of the time, and that had a lot to do with who was
at the central
governor
bank
at the time. Mm-hmm. In fact, the bank got into some difficulty sometimes because of the fact that some of our heads thought that the vision was being expanded too much. Which I understood. Because, if the bank had concentrated merely on monetary policy, the region as a whole, our region, that is OECS, would not be where it is today. I doubt we would have had an economic union at the stage. I think Dwight Venner is mainly responsible for that development.
Oh, he always wanted for us to see if we can get a political union. But I always tell him, and he accepted it, that you have to go as deeply as the political market can bear. But he always wanted to push and test the boundaries of that political market. And as a technical person, it's okay, he can do that. It is left to us, who are the politicians, to say whether, in fact, where he wanted to go was marketable and practicable in all the extant political circumstances. Now, an interesting process has taken place in the OECS. More and more vital questions are determined regionally at the OECS and at the central bank. Now, so there is in a way in which details will differ in the countries, but there is a convergence of ideas and public policies. A person may do this rather than that. But there's some ideas across the board which help to consolidate regional integration.
Let me ask you.
Which are accepted across the board. And Dwight himself wrote a great deal about these things. Papers he presented, his speeches were not just, if you invited Dwight to give you an after-dinner speech, he will not give you just a light, witty after-dinner speech which passes for the moment. He will give you something that, in addition to the food that you eat, that you will have real food for thought. That was the man.
He would say, if he had the time, he would spend all the time with us down in the research department and sit there discussing ideas, writing paper. And he wrote extensively anyways, but he would sit with us, discuss, call us up to meetings just to throw out ideas and to have that interaction, back and forth discussion. Okay, what do you think of this policy? How would that work? How would we do this? He loved research. He loved research. He read extensively and wrote extensively as well.
In light of the challenges posed by an increasingly complex and changing global environment, the bank deepened its research and economic surveillance in order to strengthen its ability to understand the long-term impact on the region's economies and consequently bolster its policy advisory function. The bank's research program focused on 4 policy themes, namely 1. Growth, 2. Financial stability, consolidation and development, 3. Fiscal and debt sustainability, and 4. Monetary policy in a quasi-currency board arrangement. The resultant papers have provided useful information for the Board of Directors and the Monetary Council in their policy deliberations.
The roots of his passion for Eastern Caribbean regional integration were in his boyhood home with his father and in his schools, GBSS in Grenada and UWI Mono Campus, Jamaica.
His views on integration were formed not just at the university, but before he went to university in October 1966, University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica, which is the same time I went. We went into the same Faculty of Social Sciences. Dwight grew up in a household which is a household of regional integration. His father, Noel Venner, worked in several countries in the Caribbean, of course, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, from which he hails, and his wife, Grenada, St. Lucia, the Leeward Islands, but he was also Robert Bradshaw's financial secretary in the federal government. And Noel Venner would have been involved in a series of regional meetings. And on several occasions, I was regaled in Dwight's presence with stories in Noel Venner about all the personalities of that period. Some of them very amusing anecdotes. So that is the household in which Dwight would have grown up. And Dwight himself, of course, he was born in St. Vincent, went to the grammar school here for a short while, then went with his father to Grenada and St. Lucia. And when he came to UWI, we were in the ferment of regionalism, despite the fact that 5 years earlier, Jamaica had voted to come out of the referendum, and in 1962, Jamaica and Trinidad became independent. But the idea of integration remained very dear to Dwight. At university at the time, in addition to those of us who were students, from all over the Caribbean. Remember, Cave Hill was not yet up and running in any serious way. And the main campus was Jamaica. Trinidad had not expanded even fully, as it is now. You had people like C.Y. Thomas, Havelock Brewster, Norman Gervin, you know, to call a few of the outstanding names. In 1971, Vaughan Lewis put together a group of 5 of us. He was the chairperson of this group. He's the one lecturer among us. Then there's Dwight Venner, Bernard Marshall from St. Vincent, he's now of blessed memory also, Swinburne Lestrade, and Ralph Gonzalez. We were graduate students. And we wrote papers on different aspects of windwards, leewards integration. They were subsequently published in Caribbean Quarterly, I think in 1972, a special issue, and you can see it there. And there was a tour through the islands presenting these ideas.
What do Sir Lister McIntyre, Sir Dwight's mentor, Sir Dwight Venner, and myself have in common? That's right, the GBSS, the Grenada Boys Secondary School. Whenever Sir Dwight and I spoke of the GBSS, he would start smiling and his eyes would sparkle. That image is forever etched in my memory. Sir Dwight once told me, Tim, GBSS changed my life. It was a defining moment, and that's why I'm invoking GBSS and the spirit of GBSS today. The rest is history. Do we have any GBSS old boys in the house this morning? Please stand. Please stand. You see, no, remain standing, remain standing. As Mr. Ashby would say, not so fast, young man, not so fast, young man. GBSS boys, old boys, seem to appear everywhere. And therefore, I want to invite you, GBSS old boys, to join me and others who might be aware, to recite the final stanza of our school song. The immortal words of our school song. Prime Minister Mitchell, I'm so sorry you can't be part of this. But he's a presentation brothers college boy. Let's recite. And when boyhood days are over, our motto must still remain. For only by earnest endeavor, the highest we shall attain. A truly great West Indies, be this our constant aim. Surmounting insular boundaries, a people in more than name. You see why GBSS defined him, shaped him, defined him before University of the West Indies?
We should talk a bit about his focus on human development. So Dwight is a humanist. I mean, he believed in people, he empowered people, he engaged people, he involved people, he interacted with people. He believed in the human development of the peoples of the Eastern Caribbean. And he did everything for his staff, for the partners, to ensure that people achieved or had the opportunity to achieve their full potential.
He was, I call him, almost like a principal of a finishing school. Yeah, at the ECCB being that school. So he took the minds, the young persons from the region, and molded that mind. A mentor, a coach, almost like a father figure. He wanted excellence from the staff. Yes? He interacted with staff at all levels. And surprisingly, he knew everybody's names. Everybody. Within a week or two, he knew everybody's name, the new ones, the older ones, every single person. And he had a nickname for them. As I said, he called me Karen P. Yes, so he knew everybody. He interacted at all levels. He made time for staff. One thing he wanted excellence, as I was saying, from them. So he would share articles, he would bring in scholars. If he traveled, he purchased books for you and just give it to you so that you could build yourself up. So he was really a people's person. We had sporting events. In his younger days, he would play cricket, netball. He got involved. He really got involved.
And he was a social democrat to the core and a regional integrationist, a man who believed in justice and fairness, struggling for the ordinary man. He was a nationalist for our Caribbean region, for integration, and he was someone who saw the need for an institutional expression at the highest level that the political market can bear for our Caribbean civilization. Being governor of the central bank didn't change Dwight in terms of his humility. And Dwight was generous with his time, with his resources. He was a fantastic family man. I mean, he was just a very good human being and an outstanding son of our Caribbean civilization, no question about it.
And so the Monetary Council of the Central Bank decided in early 2016 that in honor of Sir Dwight's work at the central bank building should be named after him.
As we reflect on his legacy today, and from the lives of so many he touched, I am indeed heartened by the fact that he knew we were going to do this, and that his family, Lady Venner, Zinga, the rest of the Venner clan, John, his wife, and all other family members are able to join us for this. I am especially pleased that you have traveled all the way as you have to join us for this special occasion. I also want to make the point that this building is not just named at the front of the building, but very soon, in a matter of days, it will be at the back of the building so that all of the Federation can see and remember Sir K. Dwight Venner.
The Monetary Council of the Central Bank also decided that the most fitting and lasting tribute to Sir Dwight's work for Eastern Caribbean regional integration is to place his image on the Eastern Caribbean $50 note, just as he had recommended that the image of Sir Arthur Lewis be on the Eastern Caribbean $100 note.
In conclusion, it has become clear that much more coordination at both the national and regional levels needs to take place in our policy making and economic and financial architecture in the coming year. The arithmetic of these benefits is incontestable, but not likely to be taken up without an overriding philosophy about who we are and want to be as a collective body. We must enlarge our perspectives to realize that while there is a lot to be done within our borders, we will not succeed if we do not combine our efforts across our countries. This is one of the stark realities we must face, for in this lies our hope for sustained growth and development. Thank you and good night.